do know that the many more people, millions, hundreds of thousands of people will die if this bill passes.
Thousands of people will die. I wish I didn't have to say it. This is not me. This is study after study making this point.
Whoa. Hundreds of thousands, thousands upon thousands, studies that go anonymously sourced. I mean, it doesn't stop there. Look who the left just brought back. Remember this one?
No middle-class family can afford a nursing home by themselves. If President Trump keeps listening to Paul Ryan, we'll all be on the street. Or something even worse.
Incredible. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavitto. Well, Granny's back. The so-called death party comments of Hillary Clinton, they're back. On Republicans or the party behind it, Angela Morabito right now with Red Alert Politics on where this is going. Now it's out of control, Angela. What do you make of all of this?
Hi, Neil. Well, I think that there is a lot of misinformation surrounding the Senate version of the AHCA. And I think that the most important things, that people really care about are, will my insurance premium get less expensive? Will it be easier for me to get a doctor's appointment and to see a doctor, even if you're doing that out of pocket? It addresses a lot about Medicaid, but the bill doesn't address those things.
You know, one of the things that comes up in this discussion is how you can have a rational argument about what's too little versus too much care, what's expensive versus not quite as expensive. On both parties count, but when you start throwing around things like
it's noon on the West Coast,
thousands are going to die and it's unavoidable and you better watch it. I mean, Democrats were very keen on talking about Republicans' obsession with death panels and overstating the case. Yet here we are now talking about hundreds of thousands dying, and this is what Republicans have given us to look forward to. The debate is off the wagon now.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you look at the scare tactics that are coming out. I read today that it was going to be 16.5 million people will lose their insurance plans. Well, then the problem is, if we're going for a free market solution, as we should, to keep down costs, the problem is not that X number of people won't buy insurance. The problem is that for those X number of people, the market has no incentive. The insurance companies have no incentive to create a plan that would get them those customers. That's the real issue. I don't think the insurance companies are sitting around and thinking, oh, we'll be fine without 16.5 million people. They want those customers, but because of government constraints on what insurance companies can do, the insurance companies can't really offer the kind of plans that millions of people want to buy.
What we're left with, though, Angela, in the meantime, is a sort of an unfair read of not only the Republican plans that are out there and being revised and fine-tuned, including how you handle those who let a lapse in coverage affect how much you're going to pay, but whether what they're paying is at all similar to what we're seeing at a Democrats here. But the fear tactic is something the likes of which I don't think I've seen in quite some time.
Absolutely. They're trying to scare people, and then the latest lie from the left is this is a cut to Medicaid. This does not cut Medicaid spending. It actually increases it. It just increases Medicaid spending at a lower rate than Democrats would like. And when we're coming up on $20 trillion in debt and we're already paying too much for health care, whether it's to an insurance company or to the government and a penalty tax, it's already too expensive. So cutting cost is not the same thing as we're going to shut down the program and people are going to die. That's not true.
You said it better than I, Angela. Thank you very, very much. This extreme view back and forth as to whether that's justified. And by the way, it can happen on both sides of the aisle. We're already seeing a number of Republican senators who aren't keen on the package that their leadership is coming up with. There are 5 on record now saying they can't support this. If you include another 3, 4, 5, or 6 Republicans who are leery the way it stands right now, haven't indicated whether they'll vote against it. But the target right now for some Republicans seems to be Nevada Republican Senator Dean Heller, who, Katrina Pearson had told me a short time ago on Fox Business Network would be a worthy target to have primaried because of his opposition to this. Take a look.
This is the one thing that particularly Republican primary voters care most about. So if Senator Heller receives a primary challenge, that's not our problem.
Wait a minute, Katrina. He's looking at something that isn't markedly different than the one it replaces. He's just saying, well, I think we can do better, right?
Oh, and we probably can do better, but here's the thing.
But you're already threatening the guy. You're already threatening the guy. If you go ahead with this, we're gonna primary your ass.
Obamacare is gone one way or the other. Republicans did not have a plan to put up at the very beginning. There is a plan now. This is a vote to move the process forward. This is not the actual plan that's going to be in place. They're making revisions as we speak.
Well, now's the time to make the revisions, right? Now's the time to fix it. You're now threatening this guy. But you do that in conference, too. You can do that in conference as well. This is a process decision at this point, and we need to get this process moving forward so that we can get to a final bill. All right, but how can you do that under the threat of we're going to primary you if you don't go along with what we say? That sounds like a bad Tony Soprano episode.
Well, actually, it's just an accountability issue.
Well, then you ought to have accountability for all these others, and you don't.
Oh, and we do, and we absolutely will.
You have accountability for him because he's the most vulnerable. That's not fair. That's not right, and you know it.
Well, this is just the beginning. No one else had a press conference.
What do you mean this is just the beginning? You're going to do the same with all of those? You're going to do the same with Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski?
For any senator or any House member that does not move forward on the policies that many of Americans wanted to put first in November.
Katrina? What's moving forward to you? Accepting something that is fatally flawed and even conservatives are saying is just a lighter version of what we have out there? What's wrong with someone who stands up and says, well, you know, I don't flip over this. I'd like to try to make it bigger, but already Katrina's talking about the Trump White House trying to have a primary challenge for me simply because I spoke out.
Well, first, we don't represent the White House. And somebody like Senator Cruz and Rand Paul have said, yes, I want to get something better. This is a little bit different.
He has said he'd like to see something better.
What's his version of better versus his? He said he's not on board. Period. That's the difference.
No, that's not what he said. He has also talked about he is open to something that could be more cost-effective and fair when it comes to Medicaid treatment, a very big issue in his state. You have to be cognizant of what he's dealing with in his own state.
It's a very big issue in all of the states, which is exactly why
I don't know. It seems like you're picking and choosing who you want to screw here, and it looks like this guy is fair game.
Well, any person that is not supporting putting America first in their policies, and this is something like Obamacare, something that has hurt all Americans, not just in the states,
what you come up with is something like Obamacare, and he doesn't want a part of it. He wants to make it better. Now, look, I'm not hardly an apologist for the guy. I'm just saying, I mean, what he's trying to do is something that these other guys are trying to do, but for some reason he becomes the target and these other guys not.
Well, again, this is just the beginning, and we have to move this process forward.
What do you mean it's just the beginning? What does that mean?
Because we have to move this bill forward if we're going to get to a bill. We have to get to the conference. This would be a vote to move this process forward, and that's to all the conservatives, anyone that is still on the fence on this bill. Yes, we can make amendments. Yes, we can move forward. But we have to get this vote through so that we can go to conference, Neil. We can't sit here and do this for another 10 months. This is something that Republicans have been promising Americans. You give us a Republican president, we will get Obamacare repealed and replaced.
And you either go along with us or we're going to primary you out, even if it means risking losing the Senate in the process. You ought to look at cutting off your nose to spite your face.
No, you know what, Neil? Democrats, when they believe in something, when they have power, they use that power and they fall on the sword. And that was Obamacare. This is the exact same thing for Republicans and Republican
as long as you're recognizing, Katrina, that by falling on the sword you have a good possibility of losing a Republican seat in Nevada, then that's your call. But that's the risk, right?
Well, we promised voters, conservatives, Republicans alike, that we were going to repeal and replace Obamacare. We're not going to fix this overnight.
They didn't really repeal it, and this is hardly a black and white replacement.
This is beginning the process. But this is beginning the process.
That's all this guy's saying.
That's not what he's saying. He's saying he's not going to support this bill. And in order to move this forward,
have you heard what he's saying, Katrina? That's not what he said at all.
That's what he said on Friday.
All right,
he did not want to support this bill.
We're going nowhere fast, my friend.
All right, we had requested Senator Heller to come on this show, but by the way, he did say he cannot support this measure, as Katrina pointed out, but he wants to fix it. So too Ted Cruz, who is of the same mindset, Mike Lee, the same mindset, Ron Johnson, Rand Paul. They all don't like the version that's come out right now, and they want to fix it. But if you're going to launch a challenge, a party challenge to the guy you don't think is sort of towing your line, where does it stop? And for Republicans who have the barest of majorities in the United States Senate, you know where it ends up? In a Democratic Senate.
That's where it ends up. Meanwhile, what does Ben Carson think of all of this? He's my special guest tomorrow on Coast to Coast, not only responding to these developments and the back and forth and the trading of horses when it comes to health care, but also over at HUD, what the changes he's making there and how we view poverty and what is helping those in poverty versus not helping those in poverty. In the meantime, we are waiting right now for a grade on this health care measure by the Congressional Budget Office. It's an analysis of the Senate Republican health care bill. We've had some tinkering and fine-tuning on the part of Republicans here to try to weigh in on things like how much it will cost you if you let your coverage lapse, etc. No big changes here to win over votes, or for that matter, to win over the CBO. Too late to do that. But when we get the grade on that, of course, we'll bring it to you. You are watching your world. All right, we are just getting word from the Capitol now that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is indicating on the Senate floor that it would be a bit of a roll of the dice to hold a vote right now on this thing, that the bill to repeal and replace Obamacare simply doesn't have the votes. In fact, might not have the votes just to continue a debate on that plan. With us right now, one of the Republican leaders, South Dakota Republican John Thune. Of course, he is part of that leadership, worked very closely behind the scenes to get us to where we are. Senator, is that right, that this is looking dicey?
Well, you've seen the reports, Neil, of members who have concerns about the bill, but again, I'm one of them who thinks we need to move forward. I just think that the policy isn't going to get better if we drag this out, and the politics certainly isn't going to get any better either. I think that we've had the debates, we've had over 30 meetings, we've had all the discussions, we've taken input, and at some point it's time to fish or cut bait. And so I think it's time to put this on the floor and vote on it. But we'll see. Again, the leader ultimately makes that decision, and he'll base his judgment on where the votes are.
Would you anticipate, Senator, having a vote even if the votes aren't there? In other words, I know in the House typically they check to see if the votes are there, and if they're not, Paul Ryan will shelve the vote. Not always the case with Mitch McConnell in the Senate, but what do you think?
Well, I think that you would like to know going into the vote that their votes are there, but right. I don't think we're going to know where the votes are until we have the vote. I mean, I think ultimately a lot of people, when faced, Neil, with the juxtaposition of the status quo versus an alternative that puts downward pressure on premiums, stabilizes the markets, preserves the protections for people with pre-existing conditions, and makes Medicaid sustainable by giving states the flexibility to design programs that better fit their populations. These are big consequential wins, I think, in terms of moving healthcare in this country in a different and better direction. So, it's all going to come down in the end to a function of math. You either have the votes or you don't. But I hope that we do, because, for a lot of our members, a lot of senators who are ultimately going to have to take this vote, that's the choice we're going to be faced with: the status quo, which is a failing, collapsing system, or a better way.
Senator, it comes at a time when a lot of your fellow members are getting pressured just in the mainstream media about how awful you guys are. And I'm quoting Nancy Pelosi, Senator, said, "We do know that many more people, hundreds of thousands of people," she said, "will die if this bill passes." What do you think of that?
I mean, it's so over the top, Neil. This crazy talk coming out of the Democrats is nothing more than scare tactics and fear mongering. These are, and anytime you look at taking a federal government program, and of course the Democrats, want to expand and grow government and put it on a more sustainable course or make it more efficient, you get this kind of a reaction. But that's just absolutely, it's so over the top, it doesn't really even justify responding to. But that's what we're going to be dealing with throughout the course of the week if, in fact, we bring this up on the floor. And that's going to be a lot of that kind of rhetoric and obviously a lot of amendments offered that we'll have to dispose of. But in the end, I hope we can get to a vote, because I think it's important for the American people that we change the course that we're on and do it sooner rather than later.
All right, sooner for Senator McConnell, as you know, sir, has been before the July 4th recess. How doable in your gut is that?
I still think that if you look at the statements that some of our senators, Republican senators, have made, there may be, we can't lose more than two. There's very little margin for error. Right. But I think most of our members want to get to yes. I mean, most of our senators are looking for a way, ultimately, to be able to be for this, because they know the alternative is, failure is not an option. We just got to get this done.
Senator, I spoke to Katrina Pierce, who used to be a top confidant of President Trump, still might be for all I know, but she was working with the IDEA, her independent group, to launch a primary challenge to Nevada Republican Senator Dean Heller as a result of his opposition to this measure. Do you think that's fair?
I wouldn't advocate that. I think that Senator Heller, obviously, like every senator, is taking a hard look at this and looking at his own population and having to make a decision about whether he thinks this is the right course of action. I think the best thing that we can be doing right now in terms of Republican leadership is talking to our members, trying to figure out what does it take to get them to yes, and try and steer this thing. I think honestly, if I look at the policy, and I've listened to in over 30 meetings to members on both sides of this, I think we've sort of found the right balance, and this is a huge consequential reform of an entitlement program. We're doing away with mandates, we're reducing taxes that were raised under Obamacare, and we're going to put downward pressure on premiums. There are a lot of things in this legislation, I think, that are wins and that we ought to be able to get out there and talk about and defend, but it affects everybody differently, and I know all of our senators are trying to grapple with and make what ultimately they think is the right decision for them and their constituents.
Senator Thune, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Neil. Good being with you.
All right, President Trump, meanwhile, winning a partial Supreme Court victory earlier in the day on that travel ban, is it greasing the skids for what could be a string of good news stories for him, the side you're not hearing on the network you should be watching? All right, we are beginning to get the first flashes on the Congressional Budget Office grading of this Senate measure. That pretty much, like the House measure, according to the CBO, will result in 22 million fewer Americans insured by 2026. I think they had it about 24 to 26 million under the House plan. There's really no way to know for sure because you're basing that on expected enrollment growth as things stand now versus the measures that Republicans are taking where you will no longer have a mandate or requirement that people purchase insurance. No indication right now on the deficit implications. I believe in the House measure, there were expected savings of anywhere from $680 to $820 billion in spending over the course of 10 years. As that comes out and details come out to Fox Business Network star Making Money host Charles Payne on these first bulletins. What do you make of what you're hearing, buddy?
This makes that quagmire just even, I think, more difficult for Mitch McConnell, Neil, because now you're going to get these moderates who are pretty reluctant to come straight out and say a no on Friday. But, you have to think Susan Collins, Capito, Portman, and some of these others. And it all gets back to these red states and now newly minted red states that went ahead and expanded Medicaid under President Obama. And they've gotten to a point of no return where you have significant increases in people who are covered, mostly through Medicaid, not through the Obamacare exchanges. And they are definitely afraid of tinkering with that in any way, even though they would get greater control under the Senate bill. They like the idea of having a large portion of the money coming from Washington, D.C., no questions asked.
All right. Now, if you're talking about 22 million fewer Americans will have coverage than not, of course, you're basing that on the notion of what the projected growth and enrollment figures are right now and how these Republican plans, either in the House or the Senate with this one, would disrupt that. Now, it does figure that if you're no longer compelling or ordering people to get insurance, if they had their druthers, many of them would opt not to, particularly the young who need to pay into this to keep it financially afloat. So is this quite what it appears?
It is to a degree, and they tried to head this off because, remember, there were some amendments made to this morning, Neil, including a new provision that sort of thought that they could coax people into not being off of insurance for too long a period of time, or they'd be penalized and not allowed back into the system. Now, this is different than forcing someone to buy insurance they don't want or can't afford, or making them pay a penalty, but still a sort of gentle nudge, if you will, to stay in the insurance market. That was supposed to lower this number just a little bit and also bring a few more moderates on board. That, so far, it does not look like that gambit, if you will, worked out for them.
And, of course, Republicans are it's one thing to go back to your voters and say, all right, this is decidedly cheaper and saves a lot of taxpayer money over the course of the next decade, as was the case with the House measure. I'm sure something similar here with this Senate measure. But that isn't going to fly when you have a mainstream media, just focusing on people who will lose coverage, or worse, as Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders are saying, the hundreds of thousands who will die as a result.
Yeah, I mean, those hyperbolic comments aside, we already see where millions of Americans were led astray by former President Obama. We didn't keep our doctors. Our premiums went through the roof, and it was a transfer of wealth. It was a transfer of wealth from the middle class to lower income folks. It was a penalty on businesses. It was a penalty on capitalism. So all of those things are still in effect, and this is what the Senate is grappling with. This is what the Republicans are grappling with. The idea that you have the conservatives who don't think this goes far enough, and you have the moderates who would like to see it more less mean, if I could coin a phrase here. Right. So it's a heck of a quagmire. And I saw earlier when you talked, perhaps Mitch McConnell sort of pulling the plug on this thing. Maybe he got a glimmer of this before everyone else, because this does not help the cause. This does not move either side of that divide.
All right, now there are a lot of people who say if it looks like this is an uphill battle, at what point do they sort of throw down their arms and go on to the next one, the tax cut thing? Or is this so wedded in what they have to do that they're going to keep trying to plow ahead doing it?
I think they're wedded to that baseline tax savings, $1 trillion, now maybe $800 billion. But again, the more they compromise, the more they either give to states, the more they make it the subsidies. Right now, instead of 400% of poverty, it's 350% of poverty. The more of these sort of concessions that they make, the smaller that baseline gets. And so you start to wonder, do you stick around and fight this battle, or do you move ahead with a simpler tax cut, later on bringing in tax reform, but infrastructure, the kind of things that you can get some W's on the board, because the economy is moving. People are excited. We're starting to invest money on things that really have long-term payback. So we want to keep that going.
All right, by the way, we are spelling out the numbers that the CBO says. This is coming from the New York Times, an analysis of this, that the legislation would decrease federal deficits by a total of $321 billion over a decade. Now, that is about a little more, less than half the savings that the House plan would have. But either way, it does put Republicans under the gun here as to whether they should support something that might save some money, but also produce for them some headaches, right?
Right. This is what we just talked about, Neil. You go from almost $1 trillion baseline savings to start with your budget and your tax plan. This way, you don't have to foist on the American people some gimmick like a border adjustment tax that will tax lower income and lower and middle class folks who are, they can't afford to go shopping anymore. You don't need the gimmicks. And now what we're looking at is a tax plan where you're going to find a sweet spot at around 25%. Hopefully, they'll still find a way to make 15% for those bona fide small businesses and get this thing going. But if they keep sharpening the pencil on this, your savings are going to be so negligible that you'll say, what the heck did we spend all this time on this for in the first place?
Yeah, that's 327 billion, 321 billion over 10 years. It's 32 billion a year. That's a rounding error these days.
Yeah.
And if you're to buy the CBO numbers, period. Charles, thank you, my friend. I'm sure that's a big theme in your fine show 90 minutes from now.
We got a lot to do tonight. Thanks.
I bet you do. All right, let's go to Chad Pergram, who's been crunching all of this. Republicans have indicated that, as Mitch McConnell, Chad, that it's problematic. The votes might not be there after this. Are more votes not there, or what?
Well, people will use the CBO score. Some of those Republicans who are still on the fence, they might say, look, this doesn't do enough to bring down costs. It doesn't insure enough people. It might give some of those other senators we've been looking at here, Shelley Moore Capito, Cory Gardner of Colorado, a couple of others, maybe a reason to say we can't vote for this. And here's an operational problem for the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. As we've said for a long time, they're considering this under the budget reconciliation process, which only needs 51 yeas to pass. It avoids a Senate filibuster. What is also known about this is that you need 51 votes just to get onto the bill. So why would a senator, and we have 5 who are opposed right now, come out and say, all right, I want to take all these tough votes that are come up in the next few days and then vote no? Why would they possibly vote to let this bill come up on the floor? That is a little bit in the parliamentary weeds there, but it's a very important point. And this is something that people are wondering here on Capitol Hill. What exactly is the end game by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell? I asked him last week, I said, you surely wouldn't bring up a bill for which you don't have the votes. And he kind of chortled and laughed and never gave a direct answer. I talked to one senior Senate aide earlier today about what McConnell's game is, and they said, you remember Wesley Snipes in the movie Passenger 57? They said, always bet on McConnell. He's very wily, he's a cagey inside operator, and people are trying to figure out what the end game is here for Mitch McConnell, but nobody knows just yet.
Is he Is Wesley Snipes Mitch McConnell?
That was the suggestion by the senior aide.
But let me, Chad, I mean, if you think about it, this would have probably been telegraphed or in his gut. A very wily politician like Mitch McConnell would have known that roughly the CBO would kind of score this in the range it scored the House thing, with some big differences, I understand. But he had to be expecting some of this. Do you think, knowing him as you do, that he would go through with a vote? Now, Paul Ryan would never do that sort of thing unless the votes were there. Would Mitch McConnell?
Well, that's the problem, because, again, if you burn a reconciliation package, you can't bring it back. And as we've said over and over and over again, maybe this is McConnell's gambit. He wants to get this off the floor. Maybe